president. In a moment, we'll hear from Venezuelans living in the UK. But first, let's hear from some supporters of President Maduro protesting outside Downing Street last night.
Hands off! Venezuela! Hands off! Venezuela!
The election of the president of Venezuela should be down to the Venezuelan people, not to a foreign government, not to a regime change operation organized by Trump.
The solution in Venezuela is to expropriate the capitalists in Venezuela who are hoarding food, who are hoarding toilet roll, because they are trying to bring down the government in order to boost their profits. So I would say that the solution for Maduro, what he should do, is to finish the Bolivarian revolution, which was never finished.
It is not the fault of Nicolás Maduro's government. Mainly, it's the sanctions by the United States, the sanctions of Europe, who have strangled the economy of Venezuela and who have forced the people of Venezuela to flee.
Many Venezuelans have fled to neighbouring countries, but there's also a community in the UK. We asked some of them what they thought of what's happening in their home country.
Fortunately, my father is still in my country. I say unfortunately because the situation is terrible. He called me sometimes because can't find food. Even if you have the money, you can't find food.
My mother is a doctor, and my father is a doctor. At the moment, they've been working like hands. They've been telling me we have no tools to cure people. We don't have medicines to give them. We feel, my mother just left to the US and say, I give the last I could to help people. But the President Maduro never been elected by popular decision. He got elections, fake election, he won the election. He say that, but he been elected for a parallel assembly that never been illegal. It's illegal.
There's always someone else's fault. And I think there's a time when they have to realize that it's the end and they have to give the power to someone else.
For us, it's hard, because it's hard to start in a new life in another country, and it's hard as well for the people that you left behind.
And you heard there from Juan, Carlos, Antonio and David. Now, there was a debate in the House of Commons yesterday. I'd like to bring in the Labour MP, Chris Williamson, who was a lone voice, I might say, in the Commons, opposing the government's policy of recognising Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela and not Nicolás Maduro if he doesn't call an election in 8 days. Here he is. You said he's an apologist, Rachel.
Well, I don't see how anyone can believe that Maduro should stay in his position after what he's done to his country. And the only basis that anyone says that he should be there is that he won an election. It was a rigged election. It was a fake election. Juan Guaido is from our sister socialist party. He won an election. He's been recognised by Germany, by France, by Australia, by Canada, by the UK as well, and he should be given a chance to turn around his country. That's got to be in the interests of the people of Venezuela.
Chris, is it your position that Nicolás Maduro should stay as president?
Well, whatever my position is, in many ways is irrelevant, because
we'd like to know that.
Well, hold on. Let me just say this though. It's not for us. It's not for the UK. It's not for the United States of America to determine who should be the government in Venezuela. There was an election, and Rachel said it was a rigged election, but election observers refute that. Indeed, previous elections in Venezuela have been declared the safest elections anywhere in the world by no less than Jimmy Carter, who has an election observatory, as you probably know. But the issue is about the sanctions in Venezuela that have been imposed by the United States. They're basically crippling the economy there. And there's a UN rapporteur who said that the sanctions are illegal and could amount to crimes against humanity. So you've got the US imposing appalling sanctions, and you've got the elites in Venezuela who are engaged in an economic boycott, which is obviously having a significant effect on poor people in Venezuela. But they've turned out in huge numbers to vote for Maduro at the election last year.
Rachel?
Well, we've just had elections, and it was the most overwhelming victory in elections which all parties could stand. That's very different from the election of Maduro, where not all parties could stand. So one was an election where you had the range of political parties, and the other one, the leader of the opposition party was not even permitted to stand in those elections.
That's not true, Rachel. Look,
and the United Nations...
Election observers who were on the ground the opposition, the main opposition, boycotted the election, and that's their decision. But there were campaigners who stood against Maduro, who were openly campaigning against Maduro.
So
the media is not controlled in Venezuela. The media is not controlled in Venezuela by the state. They're pretty hostile, just as the Sun and the rest of it in this country are pretty hostile to the left.
Do you
in
think
the
that
UK.
Maduro should stay in power? Do you think that's in the interests of the people of Venezuela, Chris?
What I think is it's
yes
a matter
or
for...
no?
No, it's not a question of yes or no,
Well, what do you
Rachel.
think?
It's a
I'm asking
matter
what
for
you
the
think.
Venezuelan people,
Yes,
not
and
a matter for the United States.
They've spoken in the recent elections.
The most recent election was the presidential election that took place in May last year.
So you think Maduro should stay?
Well, I think it's a matter for the Venezuelan people. And what Maduro has called for, and what we should be calling for, well, what I think is that the parties should negotiate, should discuss the situation. And indeed, Maduro, and I'm not here as an apologist for the Venezuelan government, let me make that clear.
Well, that's what we were trying to, that's what we're trying to establish.
Let me make it clear, Maduro has called for discussions with the opposition, and they've refused. That's what the states and we should be calling for.
Is there a point that actually, whatever you think about Nicolas Maduro, and the statistics are pretty staggering when you look at 3 million Venezuelans have left their home country since 2014, and of course there's 1.3 million% inflation, and people are starving, according to eyewitness accounts in Venezuela. But has Chris got a point that actually American interference and meddling hasn't helped?
I think it's very important to be cautious in intervening in someone else's country, but Venezuela is a very, very bad problem. There are millions of refugees moving to neighbouring states. Any Venezuelan system is deeply disturbed. The region is deeply disturbed. We're not pinning this on the United States. This is other Latin American countries. This is countries like Canada. This is Germany. This is France. This is Spain. This is the EU. If Britain cannot ally with those people against Iran, Syria, then we're in really serious troubles. This is about a humanitarian move for free, fair elections. That's all this is about.
Right, Stephanie, and the EU on this?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you see that all the major European countries are coming together and saying the same, that Maduro actually has to go. And also you have to have in mind...
What's to do with them?
Well, we have to have in mind that actually the crisis in Venezuela started with Hugo Chavez much before. And the only reason why it didn't go so badly in the beginning was that the oil price was very high. Now they have less exports, they have half of the oil they ever...
Can you name me a time where US intervention has actually been beneficial
but
to
it's not just
Libya, horrendous...
But it's not the US intervention, it's the economic problem of Venezuela.
Libya, Honduras,
Panama.
Iraq, you name it.
Right, but Chris, you haven't answered the question. You're talking about the US, and because you are obviously interested in what the US is doing around the world. But look at the bloc of countries that are also in agreement. It is the UK, the US, Spain, Germany, France, a dozen Latin American countries who say... Well, hang on, but they are a dozen Latin American countries who say Maduro must go. And the reasons they say... I said a dozen, I didn't say all of them. A dozen have said that, and maybe it's because Amnesty International has accused Venezuela of overseeing one of the worst human rights crises in its history. You care about human rights, don't you?
Of course. Well, listen, look, when any government exceeds its authority, when it indulges in human rights abuses, they must be called to account. Absolutely, of course. But that is not going to happen by the United States getting involved. We saw...
But what about those other
John
countries?
Bolton with his briefing paper, we were talking about 5,000 troops to Colombia. What we are potentially on the precipice of here is a bloody civil war in Venezuela, aided and abetted by the United States, and aided and abetted, I've got to say, by the UK government and seemingly EU countries. Well, what are they going to say when hundreds of thousands of people are genuinely starving and losing their lives?
You don't think they are genuinely starving now?
Well, of course.
Starving.
You said they aren't genuinely starving. They are starving.
That situation will get far worse if there is a civil war.
OK, Rory, it'll get worse.
All that is being asked for here is free, fair elections. Nobody's talking about a military intervention. All we're asking is for free, fair elections. There needs to be governance, there needs to be stability. This country is terribly bankrupt, inflation is out of control, refugees are moving, people are losing, through malnutrition, losing lives, children, adults.
As a former diplomat then, Rory, wouldn't it be a good idea then for the UK to call for both sides to get together and to discuss this and to find a way through?
Chris,
wouldn't that be the way, rather than intervening
Chris,
and saying...
with respect, for years, UN and UN mediators have been trying to do exactly that, as has the region. The problem is the situation is getting worse and worse and worse, and there's no sign. But
Maduro has called for talks, and the UN have said that the US sanctions are illegal and could amount to a crime against humanity. Where's your criticism of that?
All he needs to do is to
What about the United States? What did Donald
if you're
Trump
right,
do?
free, fair elections, and if he's right and you're right...
I'm going to have to stop it there
view
because we've only
of
got a
the
few minutes
situation.
left of the programme, Chris, and I want to ask you how you're going to vote on the amendments this afternoon. Will you vote in favour of the Yvette Cooper-Bowles amendment?
Listen, I want to see, obviously, the referendum respected, but I also want to make sure that we get a deal.
Sure. But are you going to vote for the Labour MP's amendment?
I'm veering in that direction.
You're veering in that direction. There's a three line. Right, let's go to Brussels and catch up with Gavin Lee, because obviously...